I'm Sarah Ratcliffe, Programme Director of the Better Buildings Partnership. For those of you who know nothing about the Better Buildings Partnership, a brief introduction. We are a collaboration of major UK property owners, a total of 31 members currently, with over 200 billion worth of assets under management. The Better Building Partnership was established now 10 years ago, and over the 10 years we've been working with those members to essentially help them to understand and address and improve the sustainability performance of their assets. We work largely with those owners on their existing portfolios, but there's a story behind that and design for performance which I'll come to in a moment. So one of the things that we do at the Better Buildings Partnership is every year we gather data from our members across their portfolios on the performance in use of their assets. So this is actual data, whole building data, based on actual performance in use. We do lots of things with this data, as you can imagine, benchmarking, enabling members how to understand whether their portfolios are performing well compared to their peers, etc. But one of the things that we do is look at how that performance relates to some key drivers in the market. And what you see here is that data in energy intensity against EPC ratings. And each one of those little grey lines represents one asset. This is a year's worth of data. We've got had data from about 2,500 assets. So we're quite confident that we have a good set of representative data from the sector. And effectively what this graph shows is that we have a dysfunctional market. So those drivers such as EPCs, which are put in place to drive the energy efficiency of buildings, particularly commercial buildings in this case, that is not reflected in how they actually perform in use. And you can see here that there's very little correlation between EPC ratings and buildings' actual energy intensity. So really, what we have is this dysfunctional market, and the reason we have that is because those things designed to improve and drive energy efficiency are either based on design, intent, not actual performance. They only consider part of the picture. So, for example, building regulations only look at fabric, they ignore HVAC. Mechanisms such as MEES and EPCs only look at potential performance, not actual performance. And we do have some mechanisms which are good for whole buildings, such as DECs, display energy certificates, but those are only for whole public buildings. And so what we have in the UK is this design for compliance, not design for performance. The Better Buildings Partnership has had a long journey to the point at which we have now arrived. And in 2008, we started work on a British Property Federation project, the Leicester project, which was about developing a landlord energy statement. And the reason this was important was because it was beginning to understand that in order to create accountability for energy performance, you needed to split the landlord and tenant consumption. This started right back in 2008. In 2011, the BBP supported the mandatory call for DECs, which would have made actual performance in use much more transparent. But as I'm sure you'll know, that the introduction of DECs was restricted to public buildings. Off the back of that, we developed an LER project. So this was the Landlord Energy Rating Project. So this was again about focusing in on that energy which is controlled by the landlord to develop a good data set and a good set of benchmarks. However, what we discovered was that with existing buildings, one of the things that's really difficult is to actually measure accurately performance in use because of this lack of delineation between the landlord and the occupier controlled energy. And therefore, it's very difficult to develop benchmarks that will drive performance. And this is very difficult to address in existing buildings, largely because they are not metered and set up to provide this kind of information. And so in 2015, working very closely with an organisation called Neighbours in Australia. We developed the Design for Performance initiative. So the rationale was, if this doesn't work for existing buildings, can we actually set new buildings up so that we can make the disclosure of energy performance much more clear, the delineation between landlord and tenant consumption. So that's how we arrived at looking at design for performance, which is particularly focused on new office buildings. To do that, we very much use the experience of Australia to help inform our approach, and in particular their Neighbours scheme. The Neighbours scheme, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is effectively the building energy rating scheme that they have in Australia. This was launched in 1999, so it's been going over 20 years now. And what it does is provide a very simple metric about performance in use based on predominantly the base building. And one of the reasons this has been so successful is because whilst there's a huge amount of technical work that goes on to actually understand the metrics, it's actually expressed in a very simple star rating. And you get a star rating from 1 to 6 for the building based on actual verified performance in use. And as you can see here, this has contributed to significant transformation within the market. Robert's going to talk in a little bit more detail about this in a moment, but essentially you can see that since 1998, buildings have improved their performance from a 2-star rating to a 4.5-star rating. This is a massive market transformation, and in Neighbours, in Australia now, Neighbours is not seen as an indicator of energy efficiency. It's seen as an indicator of the overall quality of the building. Investors ask for Neighbours rated buildings, occupiers ask for Neighbours rated buildings, so it's very much embedded within the marketplace. And just to demonstrate that, in terms of, this is specifically offices, the penetration now into the market has gone from what in 1998-99 was a voluntary initiative. Now that disclosure of those ratings over time has become mandatory, and you can see that the overall market penetration, the Neighbours ratings, covers over 86% of the office market in Australia. So we were very attracted by this, and this is why we launched the Design for Performance initiative, which looks at the Neighbours scheme. The important thing about this project is that it's industry-backed and led, and you can see on the slides all those organisations who have backed and supported this initiative, covering property developers, property investors, industry bodies, non-governmental organisations, etc., all of whom are behind this project. In terms of the aims of the programme of work, essentially what Design for Performance wanted to do was firstly to ascertain whether that huge market transformation that we saw in Australia could be replicated here in the UK, and then secondly to provide a sound evidence base to support that. So in 2015-16 we launched a feasibility study where we looked at the key elements of the Neighbours scheme and what made Neighbours work, what made it a success, including what constitutes a base building, how you estimate energy use and set targets, how you procure buildings to perform, what you need to do in terms of advanced modelling and simulation, and also the other drivers and tools that you need in place to support that performance. And then in 2016 to 18, off the back of that feasibility study, some of those supporting the project put forward actual live office developments where we tested the key elements of Design for Performance, and Robert's going to talk a little bit more about that. In short, what we found was that there was not only the potential for, but also the urgent need of the application of Design for Performance principles in the UK market. However, the challenge that one then has is, okay, if this is the case, is it possible to establish such a scheme in the UK? How does one go about that? And the feasibility study and the pilot study identified a number of key elements that need to be put in place to develop a scheme for the UK. There needs to be the technical underpinning of the scheme and the tools to help rate the buildings, the guidance around that scheme. There's something very important in the Australian model called an independent design review panel, which is viewed critical to its success. You have to have the right assessors in place with the right training to deliver the scheme, and you have to have someone to administrate it. We need pioneering projects, so projects that are actually willing to take this methodology on board, test it, apply the principles, see if they work, adapt them for the UK market. And then those projects need to be accredited in order that we can build up the evidence base that this does actually work. One of the most significant parts of the jigsaw is the industry upskilling that needs to happen, which is one of the reasons we are here today at futurebuild, because there's a huge amount of skills within the industry that need to be developed to help deliver design for performance, not only in terms of advanced modelling, also in terms of metering practices, the design community, engaging with contractors, implementing this in contractual requirements, the commissioning of buildings, property management, and also critically integrating this within valuation processes so that actually those buildings that are designed to perform and have verified performance use can actually be valued within the marketplace. And then there are a number of market drivers that need to be put in place to help that, including leadership on these issues, market advocacy, drive from investors and occupiers, but also regulatory requirements as well. You'll see that all of these can't happen at once and they evolve with the maturity of the scheme. So BBP has been working on this now for some time, and in October we were delighted to run an event hosted by Naveen actually, where we had a number of major developers sign up to implementing design for performance. There are a couple of quotes there about those organisations who supported it. And essentially what we announced back in October was that we now have 7 pioneers, big UK commercial developers who are signed up to actually implementing DfP. Those pioneers are doing 2 things. First of all, they're supporting the development of that technical specification of the scheme that needs to happen. And secondly, they're creating the market demand. So requirement of all the pioneers is that they put forward at least one project on which they will implement design for performance. I can tell you today that the number of those pioneers has increased. We're now at 9 pioneers, but I can't tell you who the other 2 are. We will be making some announcements shortly about 2 further pioneers that are coming on board. In order to deliver design for performance, we also need the supply chain on board, and we were also delighted to announce at the event in October that both Arup and Kundal have agreed to be design for performance delivery partners. These delivery partners are agreeing to embed DfP principles in the delivery of their services to clients on their projects, but also advocating the wider adoption of DfP. But they're also committing to train their staff, to upskill them to deliver DfP, and are committing resources to help develop the scheme in the UK. Again, since the announcement in October, we have many more delivery partners who have committed, which is fantastic. So the first driver of market demand is actually already coming into play. With the developers signing up, clearly the delivery partners want to be able to deliver this for their clients. We've also worked hard on trying to establish the appropriate governance processes, and in that we're talking again with neighbours, trying to develop a relationship with them whereby we can bring DfP into the UK, and again more announcements to come on that shortly. One of the things that we've been quite passionate about in terms of design for performance is that this isn't just another scheme. It's different because it's focused on performance in use, but it's also different, we hope, because we're seeking to embed it within industry standards. And you will see here that we've been working with BREEAM, with BISRIA, with CIBSE, and with a wide range of other organisations to ensure that design for performance is integrated within their standards. And in particular, I would highlight to you the BCO Guide to Specification. The launch of that is coming out imminently, the 2019 edition, and there will be a section on design for performance within the BCO specification. For those of you who are not familiar with offices, this is the Bible of office development. Institutional investors will not fund offices unless they are built to BCO specification standards. We've also been working hard on policy and advocacy. So working with the GLA, with the London Energy Transformation Initiative, LETI, and also organisations such as the Aldersgate Group, the Committee on Climate Change and UK GBC, to ensure that this market-driven initiative is getting the attention of government, with the hope that government might pick it up and run with it. We've been having many discussions with BEIS, and the Design for Performance initiative has been quoted in many recent consultations, and we have ongoing discussions with BEIS and other government bodies on design for performance. So just to finish up, we're actually entering one of the most exciting stages of the Design for Performance programme now, which is that we're actually doing this. So we talked about it in theory, we've done the feasibility study, we've done the pilot studies. This is actually now happening. So over the next 3 years, the programme of work involves all the different elements of the jigsaw that you see here, both the development of the rating scheme, the implementation of DfP on pioneering projects, market development to help develop the brand to engage with the industry, the setting up of the administration of the scheme, and also capacity building to help upskill the industry. All of these things are a part of an extensive programme of work over the next 3 years. I'm happy to answer any questions on these, but we're going to hold those to the end. The last thing I just want to highlight is that Design for Performance is very much a scheme developed by the industry for the industry, as I'm sure many of you are aware of, probably have discussed if you've been wandering around EcoBuild today. FutureBuild. See how old I am, that shows my age. One of the key challenges for the sector is the fragmentation of all the different parties that are required to deliver buildings. And what Design for Performance does is essentially draw in all those stakeholders around a common goal, which is performance outcomes in use. And so very much this is about ensuring that all of those stakeholders work together to deliver better buildings, which is what we're all about.